Welcome to session number 4, which is the last session of the day. I appreciate very much the fact that you are here for this discussion. And at the end of this discussion, we will take questions. And after the questions, we will have something at 4:30 called the networking session. I don't believe we're allowed to say open bar, so networking session. And if you're watching this on the internet, it was a networking reception. So my name is Jay Hamilton. I'm the director of the DeWitt Wallace Center for Media and Democracy at Duke. And at the start of the other panels, people have talked about which category, which participant fit into. And thinking about this panel, I thought, if you were engaged in waste, fraud, or abuse, these are the people you would never want to engage with because their organizations and the work that they have done have really helped hold both public and private officials very accountable. All of their bios are available on the web, so what I'm going to do is simply tell you their titles, and then each of them is going to spend some time reflecting on the role of NGOs and the issues that we're talking about. So to my right is Bill Allison, who's the editorial director for the Sunlight Foundation. Rick Bloom is the coordinator for the Sunshine in Government Initiative. Danielle Bryan is the executive director of Project on Government Oversight. And Charles Lewis is the executive editor for the Investigative Reporting Workshop and a professor at the School of Communication at American University. So leading off will be Bill Allison.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I guess when I thought about this panel, the very first thing that occurred to me when we were talking about nonprofits being involved in making more access to government data is that this is not a new phenomenon at all. There's a couple of databases that have been online for several years. There's Environmental Working Group, for example, which puts all farm subsidies online. And you can search these databases, you can find who's getting what from basically government farm subsidy programs. There's Center for Responsive Politics, which takes Federal Election Commission records, which are very difficult to work with, that there's no name standardization, there's all kinds of problems with the way FEC data is reported for a computer to actually spit something out like a total of how much a particular interest group is given. And they've cleaned that up for years and put that online and made it available, and now it's all downloadable in bulk data. You can also get it in different slices, transparencydata.com. I think the FEC site has somewhat benefited from open secrets. First of all, the Center for Responsive Politics, which does opensecrets.org. I'm sorry, they've the two names. They've always given the FEC information on what kind of inaccuracies they have in their data. Sometimes the FEC will report that somebody's gotten a $21 million campaign contribution because the campaign slipped in a few extra zeros, and FEC will fix, and the Center for Responsive Politics will catch that much more quickly than the FEC. But the reason I kind of thought of those two is a story recently that involves the budget. Right now, Paul Ryan, representative from Wisconsin, laid out this roadmap for the budget. And one of the things in there is cutting $30 billion in agricultural subsidies that were, in many cases, temporary measures and now are kind of permanently and are tracked by Environmental Working Group. And Frank Lucas, the chairman of the Agricultural Committee, said that, well, that's really just a suggestion, and it'll be the Agriculture Committee that writes the Farm Bill, and indicating that those subsidies will go on. And one of the things you can do, you can use Open Secrets to look up and find out who contributes to Frank Lucas, and you can who his big campaign contributors are. Surprise, surprise, the chairman of the Agriculture Committee, his top industry is agribusinesses. And you can use Environmental Working Group to find out what those agribusinesses get from those subsidies and how they benefit from it. And that's kind of been, that's one of the roles that, or where, a group like Sunlight comes in. We've been around for about 5 years. And one of the things that we really want to do with government data is make it more accessible and more mashable, so you can combine data sets like that, or look at who's getting earmarks and who's lobbying for those companies getting earmarks, and who's I know we don't have earmarks anymore officially, although I'm sure they'll come back sooner or later. But to kind of combine these different kinds of things and pull them together. And we also do things like we train people on how to use this. We do everything from teaching reporters how to do data and deep document dives to training citizens on how to use different government databases and how to look up. And we have like a very simple site called influenceexplorer.com, which even my mom can use to find out who the big donor to a particular candidate in Congress is. If she doesn't want to, for the average user, doesn't want to dive deeply into that data. When I think about this kind of data, you can do more with it than just sort of accountability, which is obviously a very important thing, but it's also incredibly useful to the public. And one of the things that Sunlight's been able to participate in a tangential role is kind of the local data explosion that's going on, and I think it's a model for some of the things that are going on at the federal level as well. There's a group called CityCamp that lobbies for, pushes for more open access to municipal data, and they do some remarkable things with it. You can get an app for San Francisco that tells you where to park your car and you won't be likely to get ticketed, or they have things on local crime, they have public transit information. Again, these aren't necessarily things that you think of as journalistic applications, although some of them do. If you know like where parking tickets are happening and where they're not, there may be a reason. Maybe the block where it doesn't happen is where the city councilman has his office. So there's different ways that you can use this. And Sunlight has kind of gotten into this space with mobile apps thanks to a generous grant from the Knight Foundation, where we're trying to take advantage of what is going on in the federal government with open government data and the Open Government Directive. And I have to say that it has not been the most exciting thing that it hasn't been the best data that we've gotten. But we're trying to take that information and make it available to the public through that kind of mobile space. So you can get to information about, for example, we're doing one on, the 4 areas that we're doing are healthcare, banking, personal finance, the environment, and the last one is education. And if you think about healthcare, there is government data on hospitals that lets you know everything from, you can at least from Medicare data, you can compare what the cost of a procedure is at a hospital. You can look at different quality measures. And you can even get information on like, how likely is a hospital to leave a foreign object in you or give you some kind of an infection. And so if you put all that information together in an app, include information on like pharmaceuticals, for example, and what are the side effects, what are the different, did your doctor just prescribe you the most expensive drug in the class? Did he describe you the drug with the greatest number of side effects? So you can access all of that through a smartphone, through a web platform, and make that information accessible. And I think that the key to this, though, is that a lot of this is useful to media organizations as well. If you're tracking your local healthcare infrastructure, you want to do a report card on how your local hospitals, doctors, whatever are doing. But we've run into a number of hurdles in trying to do this in this era of supposedly open government data. And Mark Corbett talked about one. You've got the outsourcing problem. The project that Chuck and I did at the Center for Public Integrity, actually John Dunbar did, looking at ownership of media stations. Well, the FCC Media Bureau outsources its data on who owns television stations, their range, and all kinds of other things to a private contractor, which in turn makes a profit off of selling that data to others, and it makes it very difficult to get it. We've had the same problem. We would love to get Medicare claims data and look at individual doctors, but there's a huge $60,000 charge for this. It makes it really difficult to get to it. And a last one, I think it's one of the most annoying ones that we've seen, is a system that the government has called the DUNS number, which is to identify companies so you can line them up, parent subsidiaries and so on. Stands for Data Universal Numbering System. It's done by a private company, and so you can't really get the hierarchies without paying for this information, so you're left without knowing who the, you can't really use DUNS numbers to link up parents and subsidiaries, which makes it a problem. If you think about it, there's $1.1 trillion that go to contractors, grantees in fiscal year 2010, and to know where that money is going and to be aware of it is very difficult without knowing, who the parents are. We've also run into problems with the exemption for proprietary information. There's a database called PEPERS, or the Past Performance Information Retrieval System, which tells the government how contractors are doing. And a lot of that is considered proprietary information about the contractor. So if a contractor is doing something wrong or isn't fulfilling his contract on time, you can't get that information. We've run into Privacy Act issues, which is something that's supposed to protect citizens, but you have the National Practitioner Data Bank, which has all kinds of wonderful information on whether or not doctors have been sued for malpractice, have they lost a license in a state, have they had licensing issues or other kind of issues. That is all kept off limits because when a government brings together data from multiple sources, because of the Privacy Act, they can't publish it. So that's another thing. And the last thing that we've had, and I think it's the biggest thing, is the culture change that has to happen for government to really be transparent and to make this information available, because we're struggling to get that information to make it available to individuals. But I just wanted to read, this is from an ad that's on usajobs.gov right now, and it's for a FOIA officer to work in the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services of the Department of Health and Human Services. And one of the things that this person will do is make recommendations for denial of requested documents directly to the Freedom of Information staff based on FOIA exemptions, program concerns, and possible impact on Medicare and Medicaid. That job description does not have anything about facilitating access to information. And then a second thing, which I think goes hand in hand with this, is that there's also this technological problem that government has where you have all these old legacy systems. There's one example, one of the agencies that gave data to USA Spending, it was an agricultural agency, used people's social security numbers as the unique identifier when they were giving them agricultural loans. They added a few digits to it, but it was basically the social security number. Well, practice began before there was an internet, probably before there were computers, and it was just a way to keep track of who was getting farm subsidies. Well, obviously, this created a huge problem when USA Spending came online. They had to pull all this information down. There's a database that we're trying to get that gets about 2 million records a year, and they just intermingle private information in the same fields with the interesting public information that we want. And there's no way that a government FOIA office is going to go through 2 million records and delete the little pieces that we want to get deleted in a timely manner so we can get the information and get it out to you. So, there are all these hurdles, but I think that, the key thing is that there are groups that are addressing this. Center for Public Integrity got the Medicare claims data. I see David Donald in the audience. ProPublica has done great work with dialysis stuff. We're trying to get the stuff out about hospitals and healthcare. And I think that, the role of the nonprofits and Sunlight's role is, we both push for greater transparency. We have a policy shop that does that talks to the government. We have technical people who talk to the folks that prepare data and make it and try to make it more accessible and make it available. But there is this huge sea change that has to happen before I think you're really going to have access to the better information that's out there.
Thanks. Rick?
Thanks a lot for bringing the conference together, even when there may have been a possible government shutdown. So you had Plan A, which is first to be here today, and Plan B, which seemed to be well developed. And so I appreciate all the efforts to bring us together. I'd like to address the question, what can outsiders do? Nonprofits, academics, foundations, what can we all do to help government make information more accessible, more available to assist public affairs reporting? And I come at this from the perspective of someone who works with media organizations, media associations. So we represent editors, journalists, folks who work around journalism. And we try to find sort of the common sense solutions to problems. We're very helpful, I hope, in educating folks about what the 2007 amendments to the Freedom of Information Act would do. We support the creation of the FOIA Ombudsman, and so we support their work. And so that's the perspective I bring here. Last night I was at a neighborhood meeting where there were 40 or 50 people there who were very upset because the school board in Montgomery County had decided to build a middle school, that they were going to make this recommendation. And it happened to be 2 blocks away from my house in a park. And the concern was not, what's the school going to look like or where is it going to go, but it was more, we didn't know this was coming down the pike. Nobody warned us. Nobody from our community was on the site selection committee. And we're very concerned about the transparency of the whole process. I mean, I'm sitting there last night at 8 o'clock last night, and I'm thinking, I'm going to this conference tomorrow, and they're concerned about the transparency of the process here, and I usually see these people at my neighborhood pool, so maybe I should bring this up and we can have a conversation about what I should say at this conference tomorrow. But the issue was that those folks were concerned about the process, and why weren't they told, why weren't they involved in the process, and you should hear the conspiracy theories out there that developed from not being involved in the process. It certainly bred, even for people who supported the creation of the school and the building of the school near my house, it created a level of distrust. So the government was starting in a hole in going through this 6-year process of putting a middle school in our neighborhood. And that's a problem. And this is a very controversial issue. And I was thinking about today, I'm thinking, you know what, that's where journalists usually, try to focus their attention. It's on the controversial issue that are hard. And that's where the Freedom of Information Act comes in. I'm glad we're at the end of the day. We've solved all the problems about proactive disclosure and all the difficulty there. So I want to focus in on FOIA. And there's a lot of distrust in those FOIA decisions as well. I think folks from the Office of Government Information Services can attest to that. And so how can we bring more transparency to the FOIA process itself? I mean, how many people here have either filed a FOIA request or worked in some way to respond to a FOIA request? Well, we see a good smattering of hands. I would love to see agencies look at their FOIA logs, and I'd love for outside groups to help collect these logs. They are public logs, we can see them. Not every agency makes them easily available. So, as one of 3 ideas that I want to propose here, one is let's all take a look at those FOIA logs. Let's look at what's requested here. And let's draw little circles around commonly requested items. And let's make some plan and try to ask for those records to be posted online in an affirmative way. Let's tie, in essence, the proactive disclosure to what's already been requested, the FOIA logs. And that, if we do this in a public way, if agencies can do this, if we can do this from the outside, we can help, actually. We can help breed trust in the system that an agency that's saying, okay, as a priority, our high-value data set under the Open Government Plan is to put online stuff that we've already seen in our FOIA logs. I think that'll help. It'll help the public know that decisions are being made in a way that responds to public demand, and it's documentable. We can all see these things. And I hopefully, if you do it most effectively, it can bring down the number of FOIA requests. It doesn't mean that FOIA will go away. It doesn't mean that FOIA requesters will go away. It just means that FOIA will be a tool of last resort, which I think is an issue that may have come up in the panel discussion this morning. And that's the way it really should be. The second idea that I'd like to discuss is we should all create standards for the FOIA process. When you get a request that comes in, what do we want to see? UPS is wonderful at letting you see where your package is when you've ordered something before it gets to your house. So let's create some sort of standards for FOIA tracking. Mexico has a system where they can take in FOIA requests electronically, and they can show you the records that come out at the result. We can debate about redactions and whether we're seeing enough and all those issues, but at least the system itself can be transparent. And once we have those standards, we can then build just the third idea, and then I'll be quiet, which is this entire FOIA lifecycle electronic processing system, which I think will help it'll help the agencies. If you can take in a FOIA request electronically and make that request public, and then at the other end, present those documents that you've already brought together and released and make those public, that would be great. Has this been done? Absolutely. The Department of Defense, I can think of one incredibly voluminous request that was made by a media requester that had a big splash, and 30 days after that request was fulfilled, and 21 days after the story was written, all those documents were available online. These kinds of systems exist. What I don't think happens is that you don't have a life cycle system that then makes the FOIA process as transparent as it could be. In between the request and the response, I'd love to be able to tell myself and understand where the request is going to go through the process and where those records are going to come back to. How long does it take from once my request is understood by the agency, it's perfected, it takes, okay, it gets referred out to these offices. Office A takes 14 days on average. That's how long we think it'll take to process your request. And it's going to go back to the reviewers, and they're going to do the redactions and make sure that they can release the documents. And that usually takes a month or 6 months or whatever it is. And here's your tracking number, and call them if you have a question. I had to go through the immigration service and do some paperwork there. And it was, I could see there were 3 offices that had to touch my request. It took 30 days here, it took 45 days there, and it took 2 weeks here. And I could have a 15-second phone call with each of those offices to see what's going on with the paperwork. That should exist for FOIA. Unfortunately, it doesn't. And I think that agencies would benefit, and I think that requesters would benefit. I'm going to reserve my time so that if anybody says anything I disagree with, I can come back to it. Thank you.